one. I did one recording session with someone, and I think it was Alex actually. And before I hit record, he came out with some lovely little pearls of wisdom. Like, oh shit, I didn't record it. And then I hit record, and I never got back to it.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. So anyway, Sam, thank you so much for doing this. I really, really, really appreciate it. I know how busy you are.
Oh, thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure.
How did you get into music? What was your route into it?
Well, my family obviously had lots of vinyls and tapes around, all the classic Fleetwood Mac and Meat Loaf and all that stuff, and Thin Lizzy and Buddy Holly.
Okay.
When I was about 5 years old, I loved Buddy Holly, and my dad took me down to the West End and we watched Buddy Holly the musical.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked down and there's a pit. I could see the musicians in the pit.
Yeah.
And I found that amazing because I really wanted a Stratocaster.
Yeah.
And the guy in the pit had a Stratocaster. And I was only 5. And there and then I was like, I want to play. And then my mum knew some chords and she showed me some chords. But then from that moment, I just got really into like Bob Dylan and Hendrix and Dire Straits and all that stuff. I've had a very fragmented progression on guitar, which perhaps we'll get into. But that's where it started. And it wasn't until later on in university I decided to... I got introduced to like Yngwie Malmsteen and Paul Gilbert and all that stuff and Larry Carlton and people like that. And that just took me to another level. And then that's where I've been since. So really since I was 18, I really started taking it quote unquote seriously.
Yeah.
But guitar has been in my life. I see myself as a lifelong guitarist.
Okay.
So
that's cool. It's strange how those little moments of what I mean, certainly with my children, can be seen as quite innocuous and maybe not particularly life-changing, but it can have like a huge, profound effect on children, especially. And you never quite know what sort of memories last forever and they sort of carry on into adulthood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so, as someone who's like a professional session musician, you do a lot of teaching and a lot of sort of online video lessons for Lick Library. How do you approach kind of, do you want to continue to get better? Are you happy kind of where you are and you just sort of maintain it? What's your approach to kind of improving and getting better?
Well, this is going back to the fragmented approach because, I was obsessed with guitar when I was in my teens and going into college and meeting people who could really play. That was all good. And then I was doing a lot of practice, but it was all about technique. I went from being a bluesy player to trying to shred and do all that stuff. And then I started my band, started writing for a band called Massacre Judas, and the videos went quite well. And we ended up doing like Bloodstock and some touring and stuff with the original music. And I was writing on 8-string guitar, writing really over the top technical metal and performing it live. And I love it. And I'm very proud of the album that came out, The Mesmerist. And we're still writing, we're still doing stuff. But it is so much to maintain. And there's this whole aspect of music that I was leaving behind. So as sort of in my mid-20s, I got so obsessed up to the point of social exclusion and life exclusion and was basically really incredibly narcissistic about my own playing to the point of not thinking I was any good. It was more like the self-deprecating to the point of, really whipping myself for not being able to do 16th notes at a certain tempo and all this kind of stuff. So, and I realized all of that is rubbish, really, ultimately, because music isn't any of that. And when I started playing in more production shows and playing and also just collaborating outside of the metal genre, I came back to that fundamental, the Hendrix, the Dire Straits, the Gary Moore stuff, which has been in my blood since I was a kid, but I just didn't know how to. That's what I was really looking to play, if that makes sense. And even now, this week, in fact, I've started to relax a bit more into who I am. Being who you are is a really important thing. Because again, at the same time as Lick Library, I was doing at the same time as Massacre Judas, started working at Lick Library alongside people like Rick Graham, Tom Quayle, Guthrie was teaching briefly, and when you start working on these things, you start thinking, oh no, I need to be of the same level, so I need to learn everything they can do, and all this kind of thing. And for example, the whole jazz bebop thing, I really appreciate jazz, I like fusion a lot, but I was trying to wear boots that didn't fit me emotionally.
Yes.
And that made playing into something which felt like a bit of a struggle. So I was learning and practicing things that I thought I was practicing for my own leisure, which weren't really helping. And now I look back, I'm 35 now this month, and I think maybe I need to, focus on like being a solid rock player. I love like players like Nino Bettencourt, and it's really solid, tasty, great, contemporary rock playing is kind of where I'm starting to feel at the moment more comfortable. So, as in where I wish I'd spent more time.
Yes. Yeah. How do you feel? Because I heard a Steve Vai quote that he said, "Just forget your weaknesses, double down on your strengths."
Mm-hmm.
Where do you sit with that?
It's hard because I think with that sort of thing, there's so much merit to that. I think it's incredibly important to follow what's natural and cultivate that and make it more, because ultimately there's no other you ever in existence. There never will be, there never has been. And as similar as we think we might be to other people, or I always say, if you like someone's playing and want to learn from them, it's actually an aspect of yourself which you're noticing. It's a potentiality.
Okay, yeah.
And you're hearing something like, oh, I like the way he does those runs, or I like the way he plays that riff, or I like that tone. And when you investigate that, you learn from it. But then sometimes there's that learning from fear, which comes like, well, I should learn that because everyone else is doing. There's that kind of thing. And then it pushes you into those places where you're not comfortable. But this is the hard bit, because sometimes that can open a new door. And obviously there's lots of things in my playing that I can look back at now, especially as a teacher, and I can either take for granted or think, but yeah, I can take it for granted sometimes. I think, yeah, no, I wouldn't do that the same. But then I had to go through that in order to be who I am now.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think particularly when you're doing sort of pro gigs, and there's usually, especially I think for guitar players, there's a lot of areas that we sort of need to cover. So we need to sort of be able to lay down just a really simple funk groove. We need to be able to then turn into a blues solo. We then need to be able to, oh no, you got to comp some jazz chords at the moment because the drummer's just put his snare drum through. He needs to go and get a snare drum quick. We need to comp some simple jazz stuff. Or can you sing backing vocals as well? Could we just get an acoustic guitar and do some of that? And there's like so many different hats I think we have to wear as guitar players that I think we feel obligated to sort of explore every avenue. And then after a while, we start to think, well, hang on. Most of these avenues I didn't want to go down. Some of them I don't like going down, but have provided me with opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have been there.
Well, here's the weird thing, and you and I can talk about this because we both do a bit of sort of, production shows, probably functions, whatever it might be. And I do see this a lot, and people have been doing this a while, and they end up falling out of love. There's a disconnect with their playing and enjoyment, and they're playing to do the job. And there's a lot of, again, that's admirable. But I think when we're talking about guitar playing, especially if Vi says something like focus on your strengths, Vi's not playing in 500 different bands. Vi is playing Vi.
He's not, no.
Right. And when he is hired for being Vi.
Yeah.
No one's saying, "Can you do a Steve Lukather thing here?"
Yeah.
And I'm sure he probably, and in his practice, he will be enjoying learning from those things. But there's something to be said about this, and I think I dare say that in the more sessiony musician world, you don't have to. Again, like Tim Pierce is one of my favorite session players, current, who's talking. But he's got a very unique style of his own. He's not a shredder. He's not a jazz bebop aficionado. He has a cool set of skills, which is very versatile within the genres he works within. But he's a good example of like a good balance of like working on your strengths, fundamentals, and also honoring who you are as a player, because that's how you get hired eventually. Because people don't, it can be useful to be a jack of all trades, but I think as well there's a bit of room. Like I noticed a lot of players on these sort of production gigs, everyone can play similar stuff. Everyone's got some crazy licks. Everyone's got good time. pretty good tone most of the time. But really, what people get hired for, if we're looking on the professional side, is their image and their professionalism. And are they easy to hang out with? Are they on time? Do they learn the stuff?
Yeah.
There's no ego? Because at the end of the day, playing is playing, and as long as and it's kind of like unspoken. Like I've realised, I don't know how you feel about this, Tim, but you can prepare and do your best job, and no one will say anything. And then as soon as you make a mistake, there's glares, there's all kinds of other little bits and bobs. But I've never really had many. Maybe it's my playing, but I've not. No one's ever said, "Oh, yeah, great job," sort of thing. It's just sort of, yeah, cool. The gig's done, and I think looking for creative and personal, looking for kind of any validation, is the wrong place to look for it. And in terms of validating your own playing and coming back to working on how you view your own playing, I think the professionalism thing can get in there and very much change and modify our goals depending on where we're at. Sorry, that was a long.
No, that's fine, man. No, I was. I've asked that question a lot to people. Like, what do you think? What's the most important things that one needs to take into account when being a professional musician? And the amount of times people don't say, "Oh, you need to have these chops. You need to be able to do this." It's turning up on time. Don't be an asshole. If you've packed all your gear up, or you set all your gear up, see if anyone else needs a hand. Does a drummer need a hand bringing his gear in? And there's so many times that that people forget that aspect of it, and I think it's really really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, so in terms of like practicing for you at the moment, do you have like a routine? Do you work on stuff? Is there stuff that you want to keep up to scratch?
It's tricky. I mean, I'm working with the feeling of I ought to be practicing, because that I should be practicing comes from sometimes a place of fear, and that always leads to one of the things before we had this chat, Tim. You said, what would I do differently if I was to learn guitar now?
Yeah.
And I realised I used to sort of skim over so much stuff trying to find the right thing to work. Oh no, I need to be doing the next thing, and I'd be working on something and then thinking about the next thing I want to be working on, rather than fully being with what I'm working on and realising with anything I work on, that's where the practice is. And especially when I'm learning at the moment, I'm learning 3 or 4 different sets for gigs coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I've just finished learning a set for that Women in Rock and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's easy to sort of bypass that and go, just get the songs down, learn them.
Yeah.
But actually, that is the practice. That is where how can you make that the joyful thing? So there's a bit of that. That's kind of where at the moment I'm doing Use Your Illusion, Guns N' Roses. I'm learning that whole album to teach for a course next week.
Okay.
And that's all the solos, and it's not only learning it and performing it, but it's breaking it down and teaching it into sections, and doing it in a way that doesn't make the DVD or course over 5 hours long or something.
Yeah.
So using that time now within that, I'm also having these feelings about keeping on top of my own chops, and I do think we have. I like to think of it as different periods of practice, like when there's not many gigs going on or projects like that. I'll try to spend time away from the guitar sometimes, just to look after my enjoyment. So I want to pick it up.
Yeah.
And then I find I'll have like days, 3 or 4 days or 5 days in a row now and again of chops. I'll create my own little routines.
Yeah.
Or I'll spend a lot of time trying to work with a click or a drum loop. I'm trying to improvise phrases in 4 bars or 8 bars and try to have a bit more consistency rather than open-endedness. That's something I'm kind of working on. And just keeping my chops together. And I think also, going back to this rock thing, I was getting all, I got to do everything has to be fresh and new and all that, but actually solidifying a lot of the stuff which I've got already and investigating it further and not being afraid to just do what I do and just make it and just solidify it. It might be some 3 note per string runs that I've known since I was 18, but how solid and how musical and dynamic can I play those, because that's kind of my heritage as a player. Or it might be one big thing actually is simplifying the fretboard, because teachers are guilty of showing all the positions of scales And I know, I got my major scale, all the modes across the neck, all the positions of arpeggios and whatnot. But half of it I don't really use, and that's okay. I used to think there's this kind of subliminal thing I think guitarists have of like, well, I've got to use it. But actually, you only need to use a few positions, and that's fine. That's actually okay. I think because of Instagram and things like that, people are trying to, it's like knowledge by the pound rather than by the sort of quality and creativity. I think that's a tricky balance to make, especially on an instrument which is geometric by nature.
Yeah.
It's kind of, yeah.
Do you ever, I know you said like you take a couple of days away, maybe you play for enjoyment. Do you ever feel kind of resentful at music for almost forcing you to have to do these things? Like if you have to learn a whole show on a Friday, then you've got to learn a show for Saturday, and it becomes a bit of a grind and you feel that this isn't maybe not what you signed up for?
Yeah, sometimes I feel that, but there's several things that keep me grounded, and that's, the practice is in the work. I've been given the work. I've said yes to that work.
Yeah.
My partner, she works for the NHS. She works as a dietitian in oncology and pediatrics. Okay. So she sees people dying every day.
Right.
And I think, and she comes back and she's tired and sad. And it's like, all I had to do today was learn some Brian May solos. Yeah. What the hell? Yeah. And I get to go away and I get to perform that on stage with people. And even if there's only 5 people in the auditorium and the band it's a bit of a rubbish drive there.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm not working. I can't believe I'm a musician making money. And I completely, at the moment I do have that resentful feeling. Oh, it's a lot to these 5 sets I'm learning. It's like, how do I just want to, because memorizing stuff isn't just, it'd be nice if you could just sit down, listen once and go, boom, download it.
Yeah.
But it's a repetitive process of revisiting the material over a week or so before you can really say, I know it, for gig ready, so that does create a bit of stress. And there's all that worry of, I don't want to let people down. Mm-hmm. Am I letting myself down? I'm a fraud. Like I felt on Friday I had the Women in Rock gig. I don't gig with them that often, but we had 2 gigs in a row. And the first gig, I decided to use an attenuator with my amp with a cab sim on it, and it just sounded awful. And it really put me off the gig in a really childish way in my head, and I felt like I'd let everyone down. And I made it's all the thoughts. Mm-hmm. And then the next day we would just put a mic on the cab like I normally do, and it sounded great. And it's amazing how we can really create our own problems. And guitarists we're great prima donnas, definitely. We don't admit it, but we are.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I did a show a couple of weeks ago, and it was just a charity event, and there wasn't many people, 30 or 40 people, but it was that a couple of weekends ago, and it was just one of the hottest days of the year, and we've had a fairly shit summer, so everyone was just outside. Everyone was outside, and we were inside performing, and we did roughly 2 hours. An hour and 50 minutes was to nobody, and I was chatting to the bass player, and he said, "Yeah, but the thing you got to remember when we do these kind of shows is that first of all, someone's paid us to do the job. Second of all, you don't know who's here listening. And third of all, why don't we just try and make this as enjoyable as possible? Because then when you do a show and the room is filled, it then becomes that much easier to do the performance." I was 100%. I was like, wow, I never thought of it like that. Just that last bit. Like if you make a real effort to perform to nobody, then when you have to perform to somebody, it becomes that much easier.
Absolutely.
It was, and it was actually a really fun gig. And we just sort of messed around with things like, well, okay, let's just do a double solo here. Let's do a second chorus. Let's do this. Let's just mess around with this, just jam. And it was fun. And you weren't thinking about, oh my God, does this have that double middle 8 thing that comes in now? Or does it come in later? It was just, if it comes in now, should we come in now? Let's come in now. Let's do it now. And it goes back to that, like, I'm sure it's the same for you. I wanted to play guitar because I enjoyed playing it and I enjoyed listening to it, and music meant something to me. And I always forget that. I always like if it's a show, if it's a gig, particularly if it's a reading gig and I'm not a particularly strong reader, I get into this weird tunnel vision where I was just read the dots. Don't think about having fun. Just read the dot. You fucked it up. Oh. And you just go into this little hole. And
yes, yeah.
it's when you can, if you can break out of it, it's like, actually, you know what? We're on stage. There's 20, 30 people here in the orchestra or in a band or in the pit or whatever. And why don't you try and enjoy it? Because it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
sometimes it can be hard to find, like you say, once you're in that black hole on a gig or between gigs, or even on, you said about you guys managed to find the joy in it, and sometimes that's not always possible. Sometimes, not everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
But I think it's finding a kind of equanimity with it, of like, well, okay, it's not how I wanted it to be, or how it's not the best situation. I feel tired. It's been a long drive. No one's here.
Yeah.
I'm not really into these tunes, and everyone's a bit quiet. Well, rather than making the situation worse, you've got to look for those positives, or at least just it's reflecting, like you say. Just remember why you're getting into it. I think I'm very privileged to think about this. I'm currently learning a Queen set for an orchestra thing.
Yeah.
So I love Brian May. I love those to get to spend time doing this and to really get into it beyond myself, beyond the idea of what I'm going to get from it and how the gig's going to go or whatever. Just, 6-year-old me, 5-year-old me looking at that pit, at the Buddy Holly story, if he knew what I was doing now, I'd probably think I'm the coolest person in the world, right?
Yeah.
But in my own head, I know that I'm in my underpants working on a Brian May solo and I'm tired and I'm worrying about the gig. But the reality is it's that balance of perspectives, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think it's nice to sort of reflect, because I don't know about you, but I get so focused on where I'm going and what's up, what's around the corner, what's coming up. The phone hasn't rung in a month. Oh, I'm starting to panic. But then, if I was able to sort of revisit my teenage self and show them what I've done, and it's, I think it's always incredible to look back and reflect on how far you've come.
Yeah, I think we always look for meaning outside of ourselves, but actually, or like we have this like sort of superstitious belief how things should have been. Oh, well, I should be this. I used to do it when I was 21. I was like, well, Jason Becker was 18 when he recorded Perpetual Burn and did all that shredding.
Yeah.
And he was amazing. And he did that live on tape. I should have been that good because he was. And it's like, no, everyone has their own timeline. And the meaning you give it, you can say, well, I'm a failure. Or you can say, well, this is just the Sam Bell or the Tim story. And you get to like change that narrative. There are people who would be dying to, desperate to do the gigs you're doing. There might be people who might look down on the gigs you're doing, but it doesn't matter because you're doing the gig, and that's at the end of the day. But it's an interesting one.
That that idea of just being grateful. I think it's really important, to cultivate an attitude of gratitude is really important. And and I would often. So I'm a recovered drug addict and alcoholic, and one of the things that we would talk about in meetings is that there would be people, even as kind of an inactive addiction, there would be people living in third world countries who say, do you know what? I'll trade you. You come and live here, searching for dirty water, and I'll do the drug addict thing, and I'll get myself well and clean. And I think it's really kind of that mindset where you think that there are people out there who are kind of struggling to get gigs. They're still maybe working a part-time job and they're trying to make ends meet, and would probably look at the gigs that people who are doing it full time. Think, I will trade that. I'll have that. I'll do a wedding every single weekend if I have to. And it just comes back to that idea of just being grateful.
Yeah, I think also you can't undermine everyone's suffering is suffering. Everyone feels it relative to what they know. And, the person looking for water might have a base level of happiness and peace, more peace in some ways than somebody over here who has a BMW and a 10-bedroom house. because may you don't know. Like it could be, we can't really say. But I think, the new age spiritual kind of view of like gratitude. Yeah, just be grateful. It can be very idealistic, but I think it can be for very simple things,
Yeah.
and it has to be very real and within what you can actually feel and know. Because you can sort of say, well, I should be grateful. I should be grateful for my job, but not really feel it. So
Yeah.
it's about like listening carefully, and like sometimes as well having those moments, like you say, where there's no work coming in, or and you go, oh, wait a second, yeah, I really would like to do that. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a wedding band you're not too fond of or something, and you'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, I wish they'd phone me now, like
Yes.
that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's yeah. I think it's difficult not to be sometimes side blind or blindsided by other things that other people are doing. Especially if you spend your days on Instagram, you're looking at 10-year-old kids, like, oh my Jesus, you know what, I'm just going to give up. But
yeah.
I think even things like that, when you see those kids usually tearing through certain pieces, I think you either think, I'm going to just quit, or it's like, you know what, there's work to be done. I'm just going to get back, I'm going to plug in, and I'm going to get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's again the fear mindset. That's where I'm sort of trying to be mindful of. That is that Instagram guitar playing isn't guitar playing, in my personal opinion. It's how many cool things can happen in 40 seconds.
Yeah.
It's like a carousel wheel. In reality, 90% of guitar playing is rhythm or atmospheric stuff,
Yeah.
or arrangement stuff. And there's beautiful stuff going on. I'm not denying the incredible talents, because obviously most of us would love to be able to play like certain players we see. And there seems to be, like, in any category of playing, there's virtuosity. There's the most insane shred metal players who are just super accurate, super metronomic. There's players who are like the most feely, bluesy, John Mayer types of the most insane, Philip Sayce and all that stuff, like just that kind of, whoa, that's super tasty, or the most grungy, the most punky, whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's your playing, and my camera does this. Sorry,
Okay. That's all right. That's cool.
That will disappear in a moment. Cool. Yeah. So at the end of the day, there's your playing and where you're at and what you're doing, and I don't know how much ownership we can really have over this stuff, and that comparison thing. We going back to talking about practice. It's something I see regularly in students and in myself, is that overwhelm of what do I work on, and there's relative overwhelm of like, what do they actually need to learn for what they're doing, what their personal goals are, and then there's the kind of the illusion overwhelm of, well, everybody's playing everything, everyone's amazing because of Instagram. You're getting the whole world on your phone.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to somehow do all this with it yesterday.
Yeah.
Which is, and it's, there's always the conversation about how much of this, how many takes did it take? How polished is this, and all that stuff. But leaving that all aside, you're seeing a curated performance. And, when it comes to the stage and playing live, this is one of the few things that we have as guitarists, really, to where the heart and soul is, where the connection lies between humans listening and playing together.
Yeah, it's I always have to remind myself when I see those people playing, regardless of who it is. It could even be someone like Tim Pierce or yourself or Pete Callard or Alex, or when you see them playing something, you think, oh man, that is tight. He's got such a good tone, or he's hitting all the right notes. And then, but what you don't see is the weeks, months, or even years that have gone into creating that 40-second clip. And you think, well, do you know what? What the performance I think is great, but what I'm actually going to give a round of applause for is the effort that's gone in to getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you come back to your own practices and what you choose to work on. Like I say, this is what I was saying earlier about what I'm working on now is kind of, it's a mixture of taking care of what I already can do,
Yeah,
and kind of making an inventory necessarily on paper, but just sort of going, oh, that's just like recording myself, something I'm doing a lot more of, live gigs and practice, and noticing the things I play that I like.
Yeah.
It's improvisation or within a rhythm part or whatever, versus all the stuff I hear myself going for.
Yeah.
Especially in personal practice or in more informal situations, that I can hear the contraction of like, here's something I'm trying to prove, right? It's a bit like if I started reciting Shakespeare right now to try and impress you, it'd be a bit inappropriate and random. So having that, when I listen back, it's like, that's something I could probably perhaps not do.
Yeah.
There's so much that it's actually a reduction of, I was watching Albert King play with Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he's just so much out of just a few positions.
Yeah.
And he's not necessarily spacious like they all say. He's just taking more out of less. And even my favourite shredders like Paul Gilbert and Nuno and that, they're not using thousands of ideas and thousands of patterns.
Yeah.
They're just really good at orchestrating music. It's a musical statement, and it's not about what's on the guitar,
Yeah. Where do you think because I think everybody goes through this phase, particularly guitar players, of you've got to learn these scales, you've got to learn this technique, you've got to learn this, and you become so focused and obsessed with it. Where do you think that the line is where people go, okay, enough is enough. I can't just keep learning scales. I've got to start playing music. And where do you think that? I mean, I guess it's kind of different for everybody, but where was it for you where you thought, I don't know, or did you ever think that? Did you think, do you know what?
No.
Fuck scales, I'm just going to play music.
Well, this is what I was saying about scales being commodified as a way, it's an easy way to teach. I've done it myself. You can go, okay, right, here's the 7 positions of the major scale. Bum, 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 bum. You've got it now. But no, I'm going to go to the guitar neck, actually.
Okay.
So like at practical pathways, let's see if I get some tones. Practical pathways, like you get all the, and then you got all the positions, but really, in reality, we might stay, and then maybe we have a few shifts up to, maybe, there's maybe only like 2 or 3 places.
Yeah.
That really need to be investigated. I was watching Guthrie Govan, and I've been watching him for years because I love him. And yes, he could probably he'll be able to play in lots of positions and stuff, but even someone like him only plays really off, maybe the E, the A, and D string.
Yeah.
So rather than looking at patterns, focusing on just the 3 key areas, or 2 key areas, and really investigating like the arpeggios in that scale. The major scale is important. If you're playing jazz, investigate your melodic minor. Diminished is useful.
Yeah.
Get a bit of arpeggios, but learning it in just a few positions really well. And then going out. This is something I should have done. Like, I love my job at Lick Library because I'm learning the albums that I should have learned when I was 18.
Yeah.
I'm learning like Van Halen 2 and Porno Graffiti and, Eat 'em and Smile and all that stuff. And that's stuff that I should have been probably trying to attempt whilst I was learning those scales. Because I spent a lot of time just working on patterns and stuff.
Yeah.
Thinking that was the key because everyone was telling me, you got to get your scales down. Mm-hmm. And because when someone says that, it becomes like a dogma. And then you end up not seeing reality. What they're actually pointing towards is music,
Yes.
So, I think there's a cut-off point. But then again, I'm really glad that I learned the 3-note per string stuff across the entire neck and all with melodic minor, harmonic minor, major scale, because that helps me with my faster playing. But even then, most of the top shredders in the world aren't using all the positions of that stuff. So it's kind of finding it was only until like a couple of years ago that I started to realize, there are positions and it's okay to use them because they work well. I hear about violinists and piano players doing similar things, like finding the most practical, most human patterns that work rather than the most technical pattern. But then you need a bit of that technical stuff just to kind of push the technique to a point where it's beyond what you'd normally do, so you have a good headroom.
Yes, yeah.
Especially for live. being able to play faster in the bedroom than you play live is probably useful. So you have a bit more control live, and stamina and things like that. Those I'm looking at more elemental and formative aspects of playing, which are universal now, rather than specifics. If that makes sense.
Yes, no, it does. The other thing I was going to ask is, do you like your playing?
No, but I hate my playing. But I hate it. I hate it with love, though.
Yes, I get that.
I used to get very serious about it, and sometimes I still do. But I think it's like hearing myself say something embarrassing. It's just like you can either cringe and crumble, or you can just go, ha! There it goes again.
Yes, I heard somebody say, or I was posted a question, someone on Instagram or a meme or something. It's like, how many guitar players would you have to list as your favourite until you reached yourself? I was like, I never thought of that. I don't know, probably 100, 200. There are elements like when you listen back to yourself. It's like when you listen to yourself talking, you're like, oh my God, do I sound like that? Yeah. When you listen back to yourself playing, it's like, oh my God, do I? Oh, that was a bad choice. Yeah. That was, okay. But then critiquing your musicality, I think, is definitely more worthwhile than critiquing your technique. Like, I haven't quite got that 3rd 16th down perfectly.
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I'd have been like, that note wasn't in the right place. But now I'm looking at things like time feel and tone production and vibrato. Yeah. Things like that. But it's hard to be objective about your own playing. It's like your own speech. You don't know. I don't know what I'm about to say right now, but I have an inkling. But you don't know exactly where I'm going necessarily. So you're hearing it completely different to how I'm hearing it. So it's hard to say how it sounds to other people. And I think things like Instagram and YouTube and comments, and you do get a lot of very anal guitar players with podcasts as well. I've noticed there's a few podcasts out there, and people like Rick Beato and stuff who have very incredibly high standards. Yeah. Elitist standards. And I've met musicians who are so, especially in this professional musician function world, who are so, and they're often the ones that seem to hate everything about music. Yeah. Because they've become so rational and so finicky about all the details that they've lost any kind of spontaneity and joy in the mistakes, in the sloppiness. Yes. And there's a lot of beautiful stuff in the imperfection as well. But it's again just letting go of that. Because I've listened back to stuff and I thought, I'm not proud. I wouldn't say that's amazing, but I think, that's better than I thought it was. Over years hindsight sometimes on something I worked really hard for. But most of the time, I do a lot of stuff for Lick. I record courses every month for Lick Library. I do live streams for hundreds of people and stuff. And it's just, I've just got to, it's what it is. Yeah, I think let it go.
It's that, it's exactly that. And it's liberating when you let go of that. Either let go of it or you embrace the fear. Think, okay, we're scared at the moment. There's a good chance we're going to screw this up. But I've practiced all I can. I've worked as hard as I can on it. If I screw it up, I screw it up, and I'm going to have to navigate that screw up. But once it's happened, I could just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think Tim Pierce said something similar. He said he can't wait to make the first mistake on a gig, because once you've done that, you can. Whew,
there it is. There's the clanger. Yeah. So now I'm going to move on.
Yeah, and then there's in that moving on and realizing no one's died. Yeah, nothing bad's really happened. Yeah. You can move on. There's always these horror stories from the West End of musicians being fired during the interval and all this sort of thing. And I meet these like I call them militant session musicians. They're sort of like, they treat it's like them, special forces musicians. Yeah. Like in and out, do the job. Yeah. Everything has to be perfect, 100%. And I respect that fully. But coming back to why did I start playing? Yeah, I love listening to music. It makes me feel great. It's the connection. I remember my first ever jam, open mic night, and all that. How it felt. I didn't care about how I played. Yeah, it was good fun, and that can happen even at a professional level. Because when you see the people, the professionals going at it, the ones that have lasted, they're having fun. Mm-hmm. there is a sense of joy there. I mean, that's what I love about Eddie Van Halen's playing. He just sounds like he's having a great time.
And when
He
you
doesn't.
analyze some of his playing, like, what the fuck is that? All right, it works.
Yeah,
I think Eddie's one of the only people that can make that work, but somehow it works.
but we could all have an element of that if we just
Let go
a little bit.
Yeah.
Practice fully. I'm not saying, I'm not excusing, like, don't not to work on anything. Like, you should, but to practice from a point of view of like, I care about this. I care about looking after, like, eating healthily, or going to the gym, or not having a drink, or whatever it might be, or going to bed early. I don't know, whatever. Phoning a friend. You do it because you're looking after your life, and in the sense of guitar playing, practice for me now is coming at, I want to look after this. I want to have a long playing career. I want to feel connected to the instrument when I play it.
Yeah.
In my own way, not by anybody else's standards, but in my own way. And even if it's not, Guthrie level or whatever, or any comparison I have in my mind, I'm looking after it. I'm not doing it because, I need to be better, because somebody might judge me, because of some person on Instagram said downward pick slanting is the best way to approach two-note per string runs, and all that finicky stuff, which is fascinating, but it bores me, to be fair. Yeah. Look after your playing. I think that's my mantra.
Yes. Do you think there's any merit in taking lessons from people like Guthrie?
Yes, I think it's much like I like, for example, I went to Tim Lurch, who's the jazz. He did a weekender for my friend Luke, who runs a company called Guitar Vivo.
Oh, was that in Farnham?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I nearly went to that.
Well, it's great. I mean, when you meet someone like Tim, you're learning, especially if you've been playing for a long time. There's lots you can learn on the fretboard, and you can. What was that lick? What was that chord progression? But what you're learning is their way of being on the instrument.
Yeah.
It sounds really hippie when I say that out loud, but I would say that's the purpose of going to live gigs and seeing musicians play. You really get who they act. When the rubber hits the road, it's in their performance, their being, how they play, their attitude around the instrument. I take lessons as much as I can. I've taken quite a few from Tom Quayle.
Yeah.
I've sat down with most people. Any guitarist I get to hang out with, which you don't get to do that often.
No,
I did a Jeff Beck. I did a Jeff Beck tribute a few months ago, and there was
everyone was on that gig.
Some incredible players on that gig. There was Scott McKeon was there. Bloody hell, Christian Mendoza, Jake Wilson, Phil Hilborn. Yeah, Phil Hilborn, and they're all legendary players. In this, and but the nobody was saying, "Oh, what did he do there?" But everyone was just sort of like listening and hanging out. And I feel like my playing and my motivation and my joy increased just from being in that. Now, I'm not saying don't take it, depending on what level you're at. I'm not saying I'm beyond a level of learning scales and things. I'm open to all of that. But there's also a level of just topping up that motivation and joy and perspectives from other people. Yeah. The conversation we're having now, Tim, it's all part of that. This is a lesson in itself for me, hearing your perspectives. Talking to any musician is a lesson, really. So I think there's a lot of value.
I think the idea of a teacher is, there's lots of different teachers. There's the teacher that you pay money to. You sit down for an hour, they look over your playing or they look over your technique or whatever, and they say, okay, here's some ideas as to how you could brush up on that. But then, I've had lessons when I'm setting up ready for sound check and I listen to a drum. I go, what was the thing what was that? And he said, I just did it. Like, I wonder if I can incorporate that into my playing somehow, because I really enjoyed what it was, that aspect that you did. And just playing with new players, like particularly as a guitar player, playing with different drummers, how they accent that backbeat. It's like, okay, well, how am I going to adjust what I play that fits with this groove? And I think lessons are where you find them.
Yeah, everything's a lesson. Not to get too spiritual about it. Life is the teacher. Like everybody's a teacher. The person in front of you in a traffic jam is teaching you patience.
Yeah.
And so the one thing I think is lacking a bit now, especially with YouTube and Instagram, is that fact of sitting down with another person and jamming or playing some tunes. Because that Pete Roth, I remember I was doing some stuff for his academy, and afterwards we'd do a lesson and then we'd jam on the sofa for 2 hours. Now, I'm not a jazz player.
Yeah.
He would just put a chart down and he'd go, right, 3, 2, 1, go. And we'd go through it and we'd keep on taking the choruses. But man, that was so good. Yeah. He was not, Pete's lovely. He was not judgmental about my rocker's attempt of jazz.
Yeah.
But I managed to, I found myself following things and hearing how he did it, listening, and you start to, like a conversation, you start to read the room a bit, and then you learn things in your bones beyond words, beyond even saying, "Oh, do this over this chord." It's I'll do, and then you do it in your own way, but with a bit of their kind of direction, because all they're they're pointing to something that you're aware of. Often the best lessons are something that you're on the cusp of understanding. You kind of have it in you already, but it just takes that observation to go, that's what they mean. Yes. When you might have heard somebody say years ago. I remember hearing people saying, "You need to work on your time," and I didn't know. I thought, okay, I just practiced to a metronome, but I didn't know what they really meant by that until I met certain drummers, and then things happened, and I was, practicing shred to metronome. Like, why do you do that? Is it to increase speed? No, it's to increase synchronization.
Yeah,
and to relax into that as well. There's so many different things, but these things can't be realized until you are in it, and that's what people are, jamming and taking lessons is for.
Yes. Yeah, I had a lesson.
Sorry, another long.
No, it's cool, man. I had a lesson with somebody. I think it was just before we broke up for the summer holidays, and he said, "Put a track on, just jam something," and I was just improvising over the top of this track for about 3 minutes. He went, "All right, okay, cool." He said, "The first thing I noticed about your playing is you always start your phrase on beat 2." He said, "Do you know that?" I was like, "No." He said, "Every single phrase you start on beat 2. You wait for the chord, you do a phrase. You wait for the chord, do a phrase. Wait." And he said, after about 30 seconds, I was getting really bored and I stopped listening to you. I was like, fuck. He says, "Yeah, now try it. Just start on the 1. And then as you do it, after 30 seconds, I'm going to tell you which beat to start on. And you're going to start. Just play 1 or 2 phrases. Now start it on beat 2. Now start it on beat 3. Now start it on beat 4. And just see how that phrase sits. And it changes. And it becomes so much more interesting. And all you're doing is shifting the beat." He said, "And we've not even started looking at playing on the upbeats or playing on the 16ths. That's just shifting 4 beats." And I went away over the summer. I was like, holy shit. First of all, he was right, because by playing always did. I'd start once I've told you, you will see it all the time. And every gig I did, I was like, I'm starting on beat 2 again. I'm starting on beat 2. Shift it. Even if it sounds shit, shift it. And all of a sudden, and by the end of the lesson, he's like, "Your phrasing is just changed over the course of an hour." He said, "Go away and do that. Come back in a month or 2." And I think it's just even now when you have those lessons and you're just like, oh, man, it's like your world just opens up. Like 3 new doors have just opened for me over the course of an hour.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? How that's a very simple thing when someone says, and you're like, of course.
Yeah.
But it's not like some crazy new lick. It's not some big highfalutin concept. It's just experiment where you start.
Yeah.
Or where you end, or even how long your space is. Or there's a guy called Carter Arrington who I took a few lessons with, and I did some lessons. He's an incredible guitarist, and he has loads of those little bits of wisdom. Like he said, he was just like, just record yourself doing 4-bar improvise for 4 bars with a click and finish on a beat 1 or bar 5.
Yeah,
and just listen to how you phrase. Do you end on that? How aware are you of that thing? And also, especially practicing along to backing tracks and improvising, endless jamming.
Yeah,
bad. It's bad for your playing. It's bad for your phrasing. You got to work on like statements and little. But it was just a like that. Your teacher said, start on a different beat.
Yeah,
and it just forces you out of something.
Yeah,
and it's enough to take you on it unlocks, like you say, so many doors.
Yeah, Yes,
So good.
It's lovely when those little moments happen. Do you enjoy teaching?
Yeah, I do.
Do you do personal lessons, like one-to-one lessons, or is it all online? Or
I teach for WaterBear College of Music in Brighton. I'm the head of guitar
of course you
down
do.
there,
Yes.
and that's starting again. That's the only teaching I do in person at the moment.
Yeah.
I do 1 day a week for 2 terms,
Yeah.
and that's cool because the students come in. I mean, I've done a whole peripatetic primary school teacher thing. I've done the high schools. I've done lessons to adults who have too much money.
Yeah.
And all that sort of thing. And I enjoy it. If the person is interested,
Yeah.
and is not interested in having a super formal thing, and they just want to just learn how to play, and we can jam, and we can have a conversation, and they'll practice.
Yeah.
Of course, it's an absolute dream.
Yeah.
To teach. Like I don't really see myself as a teacher. I just see, like, especially in WaterBear, it's like they're just younger than I am. Most of them are better than I am. But really what they want is maybe just to hear the experience I've had, and maybe to practice off of me and practice off of each other.
Yeah.
And to maybe explore things they already know or don't know in ways that they can apply, like you're saying, looking for those gems that go, and when they go, yeah. And they come back the next week and they go, look,
I've done it.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they go, and then they'll create, the big one is that they're creating music.
Yes.
Whether they're writing it or jamming with other people or they're interpreting songs already, but they're just fully getting into the creative mode. I don't care if their technique is perfect or not. I want them to just be able to express themselves properly, not in a whimsical art school way, but just like they can really play what they mean. That would be lovely. That's amazing to be. I don't see myself as being part of that. I just it was just the environment has enabled there and then.
You're like a signpost. Just go that way.
Yes.
Do that.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
Just you do that, mate, and do what I did, and you'll be where I am.
Yeah, not even that. Like, hey, I know I do this, and I found personally this happens.
Yeah.
How do you find that? Because I think a lot of teaching becomes like, do this, and some people need that kind of. And there's an element of that. There's a balance of like, let's. I do a lot of like shedding. Like, okay, we're going to do a funk groove for 5 minutes, or we're going to do this picking practice. We're going to do this for a while together. Practice this, or okay, can you or right. All 12 keys of a minor scale in one position or something. You know, some kind of exercises like that. But then it's also like, well, I find this happens when I do this. How do you find that? And a lot of getting people to really think for themselves.
Yeah.
Because people want, I know I did as a student. You go, oh, you're the teacher. Give me the answers.
Yeah.
But like I say, the answer's already kind of there within you. You just need someone to go, have you thought about this? And then you go, oh. And then you've got the tools and the motivation to go further if you're interested.
Yes, I think if you approach teaching that way, I think as the student, it's infinitely more rewarding rather than being given the answers. Like, okay, if you want to learn how to do X, go and investigate Y and see where it takes you. And when you do that investigation, or where you go out and you have a listen, or you try and transcribe something, or it might even be just go out and just do a gig with somebody, come back and let me know how you got on. You usually get multiple lessons across the way, rather than just saying, "Oh, you want to do X? Oh, here it is. Here's the tab. Here's the thing. Here's the notes. Here's the dots. Just practice that to 120 BPM, and then you come back and you can do it."
I often find they fall asleep when you give them all the answers as well. They don't really ingest it.
Yeah.
Because this is the thing. I mean, I remember my first teaching gig when I was like 20. And I went into I just learned like all the pen. I started trying to teach them what I just learned.
Yeah.
So I didn't really understand it. I was just trying to, I don't know. There was a lot of that going on. So, and it became very rote. Like, okay, here's 5 positions of a C major chord.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? I don't even know how to play an Ed Sheeran song yet. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Maybe we start with that. I had like a revelation with teaching. I take lessons quite regularly with Martin Goulding.
Oh yes, he's incredible. Yeah,
like he's just a fucking phenomenal player, and I think a very good teacher as well. And I was having lessons with him for about 6 months, and I said, "Oh, I'd really like to learn this Paul Gilbert piece," and he went, "Okay." I was like, "Can we have a look at it?" He went, "No." I was like, "Oh." He said, "I don't teach you repertoire. You teach yourself repertoire. You want to go and learn that? Go and learn it." I said, I'll help you out with the pick. And if your picking is a bit shit, then I'll certainly get that up to speed. But yeah, I don't teach songs." And I started to think, I was like, wow, why don't I take that approach with some of my students? I mean, not people who have just turned up, like, here we go, here's a fucking scale that you got to play. And I started to kind of incorporate that. And I would, if a student came to me and said, "Oh, I want to learn how to play this song," it's like, okay, well, these are the chords. Most of them you already know. All the ones you don't know, see if you can go and find out. Just use Google, use YouTube, see if you can find out. Then come back after a week and we'll see where you're at. And anything that looks like it needs tightening up, we'll tighten it up. Like if you can't do the C to the D change properly, we'll look at that. And I've kind of seen people progress more because they like going back to that thing, like going out and finding out for yourself, not getting all the answers.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, that one as well. Like, because some people, I remember back in college, there's a lot of listening in class, like active listening. Like, okay, can you hear what the drummer's doing? Can you hear what but they were asking questions alongside that, like, what kind of amp do you think the guitarist is using, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How do you think he's playing? What position do you think he's in? And all this sort of thing. And that was good. And then the teachers to go, actually, they were doing this. And then they show them that. And then, so there's sometimes it's a bit like getting them to question it and then presenting a potentiality of, okay, now you've met me halfway.
Yeah.
We can you're listening now.
Yeah.
I've got your interest because, and like someone like Martin Golding, he's the shred technique aficionado. Like, he is so meticulous in his strategies around technique, and you go to Martin for that.
Yeah.
If you want your technique looked at, Martin Golding, that's the guy, and he's taught so many amazing players, and he's been so consistent with his results because he does that. He specializes in that. If you go to Tim Lurch, he's going to tell you all about chord melody, and how to find all those lovely scales and get chords ringing out and melodies within them. If you go to Tom Quayle, he's going to tell you about legato.
Yeah.
So we all have these specialisms. And I guess for me as a teacher, depending on how you're teaching, I think people like, I'm going to say myself here, like, I don't know why people come, when I'm teaching, they don't come because they're getting a lesson from me. They just have me as their teacher.
Yeah.
So then it's kind of it's learning how to listen to what they want, but also what you think they should know. And that balance between repertoire, technique, craft and art is a balance as well. Like, using repertoire as a. Sorry, man.
Okay.
I can't do. I'm speaking. Canon has a 30-minute limit on how long the camera's. Sorry,
that's all right.
I apologise. So using repertoire to teach real world application. I think this is another thing where I got caught in the whole. Lots of the rock chops and intense rock and all those classic courses.
Yeah.
Were very much about licks, and even Paul Gilbert talks about. I wish I could undo some of that.
Yeah.
Teaching, because yes, he was teaching 3/8 string shred runs, but he was learning UFO songs and Rush and things, and that was also a big part of his sound, is learning the tunes and ingesting that language. So repertoire is important, but how you teach it, it's an interesting subject depending on the level of the student.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what the student wants. If they come in and they say, "Look, I want to be a full-time pro player, I want to do this," or they come and say, "I just want to play some Beatles songs. That's all I want to do." It's like, okay. Then the approach to teaching will be vastly different. And I think, you'll lose both of them if you take the same approach for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
I've had like quite a lot of I don't know if you've had this. You get mostly older men learning guitar. They've probably learned when they were kids, and then they've started again, and they've bought themselves a nice custom Les Paul.
Yeah.
And they want to learn, maybe dentists, and they want to learn. They want to learn some Dave Gilmour or Knopfler or something. And there's a prerequisite of there's a balance between technique, fretboard knowledge, and repertoire.
Yeah.
You've got to meet that in a way that they have They just want to play. They want to be able to sit down and be able to play some of their favorite licks and riffs.
Mm.
And there's a different approach to that than somebody who wants to go out and be a session musician, or someone who wants to go out and learn an album by an artist and go and play it down the pub, or they want to write their own songs, or they want to learn to record. I get a lot of bassists or drummers who write their own music and record, but they just want to get a bit more facility on the guitar, so they don't need to learn how to Martin Golding levels of technique, but they might just want to have some preliminary stuff to get them through the door, so to speak.
Yes.
So there's a lot of that.
Nice. The other thing I was going to ask, and we'll end on this, is there a point in your life where you realised that music meant something more to you than to most other people?
Yeah, I think when I was... Since the first moment I heard music, I think, because music for me has been, they say, art imitates life, right? And really, music is ethereal. Where does it exist? We spend a lot of time with physical information, creating something we hear through hearing, and it exists in the note, and a passage happens. Where is the present moment? It's just it's emergent, and it kind of and that's a beautiful thing, and just how it connects you to other people, the unspokenness of it when you work with a great band, and there's that non-verbal connection, the experiences it's brought me in my life, it's what it's taught me about myself, and what it continues to teach me about myself in terms of discipline, in terms of taste, in terms of identity.
Yeah,
I've learned to let go of. I'm learning to let go of most of this stuff. We can't define ourselves by just a name or anything. We're constantly changing. Like music is changing, our taste is changing, our playing is changing. Learning that this body, when you're practicing, you're programming a computer.
Yeah.
And if you look at a tree outside, you can't make it grow. You can't shout at it saying, "You got to be a sycamore tree now." And it's the same with technique. It's like, you're going to play Scarified by Racer X now. No, you got to spend the time, and you got to put love and cultivation into it.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. When you learn something through fear, it often feels stunted. But when you learn something from that aspect of taking care of playing, taking care, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's life. It's no different. Music is just the vehicle that I've arrived to that sort of thing, and I think people can do that through golf, they can do that through knitting, they can do that through working in Tesco's, they can do that. It's just whether or not you're willing to hear that message.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that in kind of a metaphysical spookiness. I think it's just the reality of life. It's very real. Music is... It's also taught me a lot about being social. I realised I was practicing all the time, and I was missing out on... There's lots of great musicians who write amazing music, technically.
Yeah.
But some of the music that resonates with me most are people who are angry, or people who are saying something beyond just what they're doing on the instrument.
Yeah.
As much as I love Dream Theater and things like that, and Jacob Collier, there's a lot of stuff in that music which speaks to one element but doesn't speak to the whole element. And I think we all have that to a point. We can only talk from the perspective that we know, ultimately.
Yes.
So music, absolutely, 100%. It's music is life, life is music. They're both analogous. There's there's a philosopher, Alan Watts, who does some great comparisons in music to the experience of the mundane every day. We don't play music in order to arrive. That's what he said. You don't play a song to get to the end of the song, otherwise songs would be 20 seconds long. You play music because it's an undulating, developing picture.
Yes.
And that's life. Who wants to? I always say this to students when they're like, "I need to be better. I need to be better tomorrow, today, whatever." I'm like, "So what does it look like? What's that actually feel like? What does that look like when you've got there?" And they're like, "Don't know." Most of them don't. I don't know. If I ask myself, I kind of don't want to know. I want to keep on being curious. I want to, every gig, everything is new.
It's always
to think
journey.
Is the death. That's death. To know everything is death. To not know and to be curious and be open to it is life. That's it. Not knowing. We don't know why we're here. That's good. That keeps us open to, what if? That's beautiful.
I think that's a good spot to end as any, man. I really, really appreciate it.
No, man, I appreciate that too.
It's been illuminating.
Sorry, I've talked a lot, and
That's okay.
I also, anybody listening to this, I would like to also preface that I don't know any of this stuff. Like I'm talking from my own experience here, and that's always going to change. And I feel very lucky and very privileged in many ways that I get to do this as a job and even talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's all work in progress.
Yes, it is. Excellent. Anyway, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. And we'll speak soon.
Speak to you soon, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you.